I'm glad you're chit-chatting. We're going to keep this very low-key, very casual. And we're going to get started with one of our chiefs, but Jerry will be coming soon. So, this is kind of an encore performance of our Meet the Chiefs. Was it 2 months ago? Yeah, a couple months ago. We had the Chiefs talk with our Romeo breakfast group, which is mainly men, but women can come and listen to the speakers. But there was a request to really have them back. So thank you for being here. And yeah, we're just going to get a little lowdown on what's going on with the police department and the fire department once Jerry arrives. So we have Brian Shady Austin here. He is our relatively new police chief. But,
brand new.
Yeah, but has been here since the summer, right?
I'm spoiled yet.
He's spoiled. So I'm going to hand it off to him, and then when Jerry comes, we'll get him involved with the talk as well. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
I just want to establish that. And I will preface something too. I'm going to sit for Brennan's sake so that he doesn't have to follow me. But it's going to be hard for me because I'm normally a person that moves around a lot. So this will be a challenge. If you see me get up, Brennan, just say, just point downward and I'll get down. I'd also like to apologize. I just had some oral surgery done. So if it sounds like I'm really straining or stressing my words, it's because I'm missing a few teeth right now, okay? So bear with me. It's great to see women in the audience. A little bit of a change from the last time I was here. Let me just introduce myself, give you a little bit of a background as to who I am, where I came from. I do that because it really tends to give some insight as to sort of my operating philosophy and why I go about the ways and the operation of the police department the way I do. So don't hold it against me. I'm a Chicago kid. But I grew up having an older brother who was a Bears fan and a Cubs fan. Although I am a Cubs fan, the Brewers are not the Cubs' rival. So I root for the Brewers. And because I have an older brother who used to toss me around the room, I became a huge Packers fan because he was a Bears fan. And so my heart really is with a lot of Wisconsin traditions, even though I'm from Chicago. So born and raised in Chicago, I went to my undergrad at Illinois State University down in Normal, Illinois. There's nothing normal about Normal, Illinois. When I was a young kid, 18 years old, I had a really great academic advisor that advised me and gave me a good advice and said, hey, you need to start going to job fairs just so you get used to talking to recruiters, get a sense of what different type of police officer or in law enforcement you wanted to be a part of. I knew in my teens I was going to be a police officer. I had some, what I will say, innocent run-ins with police. Innocent in that I did nothing wrong. It was a nature of probably being a kid in the city of Chicago and being at, frankly, the wrong place at the wrong time, which is not a good excuse, but that's what I attribute a lot of my police contacts. Having done nothing wrong, I was a good kid. Grew up in a single parent home, and the last thing I wanted to do was make mom mad, right? So although I had decision points in my life, I hung out with folks I probably shouldn't have, who hasn't, but I myself had a halo over my head. I just knew where that line was. And so I had a lot of police contacts for behaviors that I was not responsible for. I didn't do anything wrong. And so I was frisked at a young age. I was stopped several times at a young age as a kid by Chicago police. And that had somewhat of a traumatic impact on me. And I really had this ideal of what a police officer was. And it wasn't until I met a police officer. I was out of my neighborhood riding my bike, going over to see a friend in an adjacent part of town, and a police officer rolled up to me, and I immediately dropped the bike because I knew the routine. I stopped, made sure my hands were clearly visible, and the cop was still in his car and said, hey, what are you doing? Sir, I'm just riding my bike going to a friend's. He said, no, what are you don't have to tense up like that. I just wanted to talk to you and say hi, introduce myself. I've seen you riding your bike here a couple of times this summer, and I just wanted to say hi and make sure that you knew where you were going, and if there's anything you need, I was here for you. And that was a really good interaction that I had. introduced himself by his first name. And back then, the DARE program, under Nancy and Ronald Reagan was a really big thing and was really being pushed in the Chicago and urban environments. And so that's pretty much what I knew of cops, right? The DARE program, and that they stopped me a lot. And it wasn't until I met this officer who really gave me a different perspective of what a police officer could be and should be, that really lit something under me. And I said, wow, I want to be that guy. I want to be that cop that is looked upon favorably and is approachable. And he reminded me of some of the teachers that I had that I really liked, just in the manner in which he approached me. And so I wish to this day I remembered that cop's first and last name, because I would give him a lot of credit for where I am today. Because were it not for him, I would likely not have been in law enforcement. So at an early age, I was a young teen then. I knew I wanted to be in law enforcement. Just didn't know what type of law enforcement. I knew I didn't want to be in necessarily big city policing like Chicago. But as a young kid, what do you see on TV? FBI, U.S. Marshal, all this other, the federal stuff, right? And as I learned through my undergraduate experience that a lot of that work, which is very vital, very important, and I appreciate the work that the federal agents do for us on a day-to-day basis, but I was a young kid full of adrenaline, wanting action, wanting to have immediate impact on the streets, and that was not the FBI. That was not the United States Marshal Service. Those are what I would consider federal detectives, right? And I did not want to do that type of work. I knew I wanted to get into local law enforcement. And so going back to this academic advisor who encouraged me to go to job fairs, I took her up on that. And at 18, being this kid who sort of fresh out of the Chicago elements, Normal, Illinois was my first experience with anything but Chicago. I had been going through Catholic schools from an early age because my mom worked for the Archdiocese, and we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but we were fortunate enough that her employment afforded me a good education through Catholic school for 12 years. But I was, really not exposed to the public school system until I got to college, and that was a sort of a slap in your face, when you're coming from what I would consider somewhat of a sheltered environment in private education. But I was still a Chicago kid, right? I wasn't naive. I'd seen some things, experienced some things, but I was, somewhat sheltered. So when I chose to listen to my academic advisor and started to walk through the rows of the job fair, I passed, or tried to at least, the Madison Police Department booth, the table that they had. The reason I said I attempted to is because I got the strong grab in the arm from a gentleman who you may have heard of. His name is Mike Koval. He was a Madison Police Sergeant and recruiter at the time, then went on to become the chief of police for the city of Madison. And he said, "Hey kid, you're not gonna walk past my booth." And I was just shocked by that. And he really, if you know Mike, he's got a really big personality, I'll say. Sometimes, and I know the former chief, and obviously I still keep in touch with him, so he won't be too upset with me saying this, but sometimes he talks a lot. Maybe that's where I got it from, I don't know, but he was certainly not shy about how he felt that I should not have passed up the Madison Police Department booth. I had heard of Madison. I had friends that had come up to school in Madison. I'd been up here maybe once before, but as a young kid who grew up in an urban environment, who, even though I grew up in the city of Chicago, which gets awfully cold, I am not a fan of anything cold whatsoever. I'm wearing layers right now, and I'm perfectly comfortable. Right? So my headspace was, okay, I want to be a local law enforcement officer in Arizona, in Florida, and I really was looking at these spaces of okay, there's potential for me. So why in the heck would I want to go further north? Yeah. What's cool about that is that Mike Koval challenged me. He said, "Listen, You don't go where the weather is, you go where your happiness is. You go where you're gonna feel, where you have the most worth, where you feel like you're making the most difference in people's lives. Let me introduce you to the Madison area in general, not necessarily the city. He wanted to introduce me to the greater Madison area in Dane County. So I took a couple trips when gas was $1 a gallon, and was reasonably affordable for a broke college kid. I took a couple trips up 51, straight from Bloomington, Normal, Illinois, to Madison. And fortunately for me, it was the summertime, so that was good. And it left a really long-lasting impression on me. So not only did I explore the area, I had a chance to interact with the police department, heard how they interacted with the suburban agencies, which we are considered a part of, and really liked the concept of policing that was going on here. Most folks don't know, but the Madison Police Department is the father of modern community policing. And I know that there are a lot of challenges with my former police department and some of the really difficult sort of decision steps that have had to have occurred in the last several years, particularly last year was very challenging. But they are still, in my opinion, even as chief of Monona today, a pretty innovative agency. And a lot of agencies around the world have mimicked or followed some of the things that the Madison Police Department has done. And so I say that because I'm very proud to be here, but there's a foundation that I had in working nearly 20 years at the Madison Police Department, doing everything from work with the gang unit and supervising the gang unit, running homicides and crime scene investigations, to being responsible for all of traffic enforcement for the city of Madison, all of parking enforcement, all of the property and crime scene evidence, the community policing teams. I sort of had my hand in a lot of things at the Madison Police Department, which gave me, I think, a good perspective on what I think an ideal agency is. Here's why I left. I frankly, was at a point where I felt that, I moved here 20-something years ago, just a little over 20 years, and Madison to me was a small town. Remember, I'm the Chicago kid. As I started working years and years and years on the police department, I found it more challenging for me to be that cop I always wanted to be. That person that doesn't put Band-Aids on things, that really wants to get to the root of the problem and help work with the community to solve the problem. The best times of my law enforcement experience, I have many, but some of the best ones was when I was a police officer that was a community liaison for the Williamson-Marquette neighborhood, the Tenney-Lapham neighborhood, some of the more, what I will say, progressive and very, determined neighborhoods. These are the best words I can think of, folks. Determined neighborhoods in the city, and frankly, the ones that had a lot of political power. Right? They were often the most vocal in the city. If you're not familiar, those are the two neighborhoods right on the isthmus on the east side of the Capitol. And so it was great working with neighborhoods who really challenged the police department and challenged the status quo. And they found their kid, I guess, because I really appreciated the insight and those experiences. However, I was still a cop. I believe that there should be law enforcement. I believe that there should be consequences to breaking the law. There's different avenues how we get to the consequences and what those consequences should be, but I did not believe that we should be operating in a police-free society. I mean, where do you even begin to have a conversation with a cop, with somebody who thinks that I shouldn't exist or my profession shouldn't exist? So it was interesting navigating those conversations, but it really opened my eyes to, wow, this is the type of police, this grassroots, ground level, street level police officer I really wanted to be. Well, fast forward several years, Madison explodes, right? Population goes up, calls for service goes up, the violence goes up. I went to more shootings and homicides and really horrific events in the latter years of my career. And I'm comparing stories to some of my friends who are some Chicago cops, some suburban cops. And our stories are similar, right? They're experiencing the same things in a large urban environment that I'm experiencing in Madison. And I found myself, frankly, putting Band-Aids on situations because I didn't have enough time or resources to really address the root of the problem. And I don't hold sort of the police administration at fault with that. I think that Madison, for those of you who've been around the sun longer than I and have been here much longer, Madison, I think, likes to identify themselves as a small town. They are no longer. They have big city issues. And I think that what my challenge was, and one of the reasons why I was sort of at this determination point in my professional career, was that Madison did not appear, and again, this is just Brian speaking, did not appear as if they were recognizing this shift and this change. And I'm not saying that that meant the police department needed to drain the city funds and have all the resources in the world, but I think just philosophically there needed to be a shift in ideology that supports the fact that Madison was a bigger city than what it used to be 20 years ago. The crimes were different. The type of policing and the way in which we provided that service has shifted. And now how then does the community address that and adapt to that along with the police department? I found there to be a little end in sight, frankly. Having been here for 20 years and having friends and family in the Monona area, having dined and entertained and voted off our lakes and in our community here in Monona, I had always had a fond concept of Monona, having friends and associates who had worked here. I knew that this was a good place. And so after Wally decided to retire for the second time, meaning he retired from his first law enforcement agency, became chief of Monona for a good 16 years, and he decided to retire, I said, Brian, you know, here's where you put your money where your mouth is, right? Because I was giving a lot of feedback and having a lot of ideas of what I think an ideal model of policing could be. But I was at the captain's level at Madison. So I wasn't at the decision-making point in my career at Madison where I could really implement change here and now. And I decided, well, here's an opportunity for me. And I applied, and you wonderful folks and your police and fire commission took the risk on some skinny kid from Chicago and said, here you go, we think you'll do a good job. And so I got sworn in on June 1st, and as was mentioned by Diane, I've been here all summer. What a long summer. But I've adjusted, and you know, some of the things that you know, I'm looking to implement, I have already implemented some changes, but moving forward is what I identified, and mind you, none of this, Wally did a fabulous job. He and I are just two different people, right? I think two different generations, two different sort of ideologies. We all want the same end result, but going about it, you know, we have different paths in which we go about our end goal. I feel that community engagement is huge. And what I mean by community engagement is, you know, where I interact with folks on a daily basis, not just me, not just the chief, but all of our staff have the opportunity to interact with folks, not only when it's the worst day of their lives, not only when we have to respond to a traumatic incident or a crash or, you know, a property crime complaint, but opportunities like this, where we just get to shoot the breeze, where we just get to have a conversation. I've had so many hot chocolate cups and brownies, and I've been in homes, and I've walked, you know, a lot of miles on these shoes here, and that's good. I've learned so much, and I think the community has learned so far a lot about me and what I hope to bring here. We have a relatively young group of officers. There's 21 sworn police officers. There are 5 full-time dispatchers. There are 2 part-time dispatchers. And I say relatively young in that we've only had 1 or 2 retirements in the last couple of years. Next year, we're looking at likely 2, maybe, retirements. The rest of the balance aren't really retirement eligible. They're fairly young, and they're really enthusiastic. These group of officers and dispatchers could have chosen to work anywhere in their professions. They're really skilled at what they do. They're really passionate about what they do. They're good people. I would not be here if I thought any different. They could work anywhere, in my opinion. Madison, Green Bay, all of these really top-notch, quote-unquote, agencies, I think would highly benefit from their experience and from their talents. The reason they're here is because they love this community. They care about this community. And they feel the love back. Now, it's not met without its challenges, right? Of course. We often don't come, as I mentioned before, at the brightest times of people's days, right? But they at least feel the appreciation. 2020 was an incredibly challenging year. I come from an agency that is used to seeing and experiencing protests. It is the nature of what Madison does. It's you aren't the Capitol Police, but you have everything else around it. You have State Street, you have all that area down there. Part of what I did at Madison, I spent years being responsible for special events. Special events also included protest activity, but most of the time it was the planned events. So concerts on the square, Taste of Madison, Freak Fest, the fireworks, Shake the Leg, etc. All the feel-good stuff that I wish I wasn't a cop so I can enjoy. But hopefully it helped make it a safe environment for folks who were. But part of what I did was also emergency operations for all of the protests. And there were over 100 consecutive days of protest activity in Madison. As you can imagine, that was a strain, both physically, based on the demands of always having to work and work long hours, but obviously emotional strain. And it's hard not to take personal offense to some of the things that were said, written, and sometimes directly to the officers' faces. And I can tell you some of the challenges that some of the officers face, especially some of the officers of color, was being told or called certain names that are very, very harmful. A traitor almost. When all you're doing, you're putting your life on the line to protect folks that you've never met. You don't know if there's any day that's gonna, something's gonna happen in your day where you're not gonna come home. And it's because you're trying to protect this community and folks that you may have never met before. And so hearing some of that and experiencing some of that for over 100 days really, takes your toll. Some of us who have been around for a little bit, you learn to cope with that. You learn to build up a little bit of a shield with that. You learn to try your best not to take it personally and disassociate as much as you can with sort of frontline, the frontline experience. But some people are on the front line, and we're on the front line every day. The reason I'm bringing this up is because Monona, I think for the first time in a very long time, had their set of protest activity in which the officers, the protest and the vitriol was directed at the police officers. They're still recovering from that. And it's been a challenge for me to keep morale up, to keep folks motivated, knowing that good people like you really do appreciate the work that they're doing. Not without criticism. Criticism is important. As cops, we wield a lot of power. You give it to us, but we wield a lot of power. It's important for you to check us on that power. And it's important for you to challenge sort of the status quo. I get that. But you can also do that while also supporting and appreciating the fact that cops are out there risking their lives every day with no guarantee that they're going to go home back to their kids and their family. And so that's what I'm trying to preach to our crew, is that you have it good here in Monona. You people, you wonderful people, I should put in that, really do go out of your way to show appreciation for police and fire. Now, I'll segue in saying that part of that appreciation sometimes hits the pocketbook. And what I mean by that is the 1957 building that I'm working out of right now is out of date. And when I'm looking to promote, when I'm looking to recruit and retain folks, it is very, very challenging for me as a new chief to extend that beyond my words because I at some point have to bring the prospective candidate into the police department. And frankly, and I mean this with all due respect because I know that we're working on changing that, it's embarrassing bringing folks back to the police and fire department spaces. It's completely outdated. There is no functioning break room. There's very little space to do productive work safely. There are some serious safety concerns as it relates to the workspace because of where the prisoner portion is, based on where the officers work, based on where the break area is, based on where the dispatch center is. And some of you, I'm looking around the room, took the tour personally. If you hadn't had a chance to, Brennan, wonderful Monona media person, new also like me, helped put together a video. It's on YouTube. You can access it through the Monona media YouTube site, or if you're on Facebook, or if you are on, I heard it's on Nextdoor.
It's on the website too, mymonona.com.
mymonona.com website, thank you, Brennan. You can access a tour that Chief McMullen and I did, and wonderfully, beautifully edited, thank you, Brennan, by Monona Community Media. And so you can see some of the spaces that I'm talking about here. I haven't had one person come in and say, Chief, what are you talking about? You guys can manage. It's really been, frankly, most people walk in there and the jaws start to drop. Because I think folks think that the spaces are more modern than what they are. They're frankly not. I'm looking at the kitchen behind me in envy. I wish your police department had a space like that, or even half of that. They don't. I'm looking at the training space, or the community space, or the meeting space that we're all meeting in here today. And I know this is an old building as well that definitely needs update. We don't have this. I'm envious of this. And so when you're talking about having this expectation that police officers have to adapt to policing in a 21st century, when you're using a very outdated building that is not equipped to receive 21st century technology, it becomes definitely a challenge for retention and recruitment. You all deserve the best, and I need to be able to compete with the best, right? We have a lot of communities in our area that have invested in these spaces, and I think that we need to be raising our bar to make sure that we provide our public safety personnel the best there is. And for two reasons. Number one, my job is to keep our communities safe, and it's also to solve crimes when they do happen. I need the facilities in which to support that. I need the human power, I hate saying manpower, human power, because I'm hoping to recruit more fabulous women. The human power to come in who are talented and skilled to be able to do the job, to help prevent crime, to help engage the community that I expect everyone to do in my police department, and to be able to solve the crimes that do happen. And so I'll get off my soapbox about the station, because the reason that I wanted to bring that up, number one, make sure you're aware that it's not a closed deal yet. Number two, there is a political support. I'd encourage you to continue to, if you believe that yes, the police and fire do need updated facilities, to continue to make that known with our policymakers, who right now are certainly have voted in support of starting that process. But things change, and I don't want us to be forgotten about. We were sort of, before I got here, kind of put to the side with a very large investment project up the street at San Damiano, which I think is a beautiful park. But I don't want the next event to happen where we get pushed down the road again, right? And I'm telling you, we're probably at critical stages of needing updates, okay? So that said, we work with what we got. And I think that your officers and your staff are doing a fabulous job of working with the resources with what we have. Any questions on that so far? I've been going on for some time. No? Okay. One of the things that I have instituted starting January 1, the new guy comes in, I'm this quote-unquote Madison guy, right? I'm coming in with a lot of ideas, a younger, I'll say, new chief. And things that in my previous job, I always said, if I were chief, I would have done it this way. If I was chief, I'd do it this way. Well, now I'm reminding myself, remember when you said that, Brian, 10 years ago, how you would do that this way, or Remember how you had this idea that was shot down and you thought it was a really good idea? Now's my time to shine. Now's the opportunity. And none of this that I'm sharing or I'm doing in-house is a secret, because I laid it all out there during during the high rate process, in public forum and multiple interviews. So none of it's a surprise. For example, community engagement. You've heard me mention that a lot now. I am requiring that each of our staff, from dispatchers to police officers to the police chief to my lieutenants, all engage one session per quarter of the year, so 4 times a year, minimally, that they ought to do something like this. That they ought to go out, introduce themselves, show up at the concerts, show up at the senior center, go to La Rosita, for an event. They ought to do that, to introduce themselves so that they can have these, what I feel are immensely beneficial interactions. Prior to me getting on this job, that wasn't a requirement. And your safety net, especially in law enforcement, is to hang out with your group. Nobody can relate to me. Nobody's gonna understand what I go through. Nobody's gonna, be able to, share these experiences with me. Well, you've already heard a lot of things about my life and my experiences, and I'm not saying these cops or these dispatchers have to share where they're from, where they grew up, etc. But what I am expecting is that they share their experiences. How's it like being a dispatcher? That is an incredibly challenging job. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Can you imagine being on the end of a phone line, listening to something that's happening and not being able to immediately do anything about it? Hearing screams on the end of a phone line and not knowing if that person's going to be okay or not being the one that physically responds and saves the day, or thinking that maybe you messed up, or that you delayed too long, or that you entered a keystroke wrong, or that maybe you didn't hear. I mean, it is incredibly stressful in what they do every day. On top of that, they're our lifeline. Ours, as in sworn officers, lifeline. If I get on this radio and scream for help, they're the ones hopefully listening, and they're going to come and rally for help. They're going to relay that out to Monona and other agencies that we need help. They also are the first line sort of folks that we see when we have unhappy customers. So they see and hear and experience a lot of the profanity-laden complaints that are thrown at them, and they oftentimes have to diffuse situations, and they do a phenomenal job, 24 hours a day, our dispatchers do. But I want others to hear those stories, and I want them to hear it from them. I was never a dispatcher. I know what they do. I know how hard it is of the job they do, but I was never in that role. So I think it's beneficial for the community members to interact with our dispatchers. I think it's beneficial for community members to hear from our patrol officers and ask questions. Hey, why is it that you girls and guys don't do this? Or why is it that I don't see too many of you during this time of day? Well, they'll tell you they're at Walmart taking a complaint, or they'll tell you that, they just left, I'm gonna get a little gory here, but they just left a fatal baby call, right? A fatal infant call, and they needed time to decompress because they have kids at home, right? So they might not be on Winnequa for that hour of the day, but they'll be there later. And mind you, there's only a couple of them at a time that work on any given shift. One of the things I was blessed with that I'm no longer is a lot of cops to work with at the Madison Police Department. I'll tell you, if they ever tell you that they're completely understaffed, I don't work there anymore, but I'll tell you that they're not completely understaffed. They have the resources to get the job done. Now, they deserve more because they're stretched out a lot and they have all these specialty units and that takes away from patrol. We don't have that ability. Right now, what is it, 10 o'clock? How many officers do you think are working right now? Just your best guess, and I won't judge you. 2? Anybody else? Anybody think it's 4, 3? Yeah. The right answer is right here, 2. All it takes is for one call, and what happens to those officers? They're off your streets. You no longer have anybody who's able to sit at Nichols and Maywood like they so desperately need to do some crossing guard enforcement. You no longer have anybody that's able to sit on Winnequa. You no longer have anybody that's able to address the dangerous driving behavior on the Beltline that we all experience and see every day, because we have so few. And what they do with few resources from a new guy who comes from a bigger agency blows me away. It's quite impressive how they are able to handle situations either by themselves or just with one additional officer. There are calls that our Monona officers take with 1 or 2 officers that my prior agency used to handle with 4 and 1 supervisor, right? So watching me come in as the new chief, I'm like, are you sure you're gonna be able to go to that? You need me to go out there with you? No, chief, we got this. This is how we've been operating for some time. That's not to say that they're comfortable, right? They would love nothing else but to be able to, yes, take that Walmart retail theft, right? They are a customer of ours too. They are part of our community, but also answer the call to some of these traffic complaints that we get, because by the way, they are also the ones that respond to crashes. And they responded to injury accident crashes. Heck, we just had one not too long ago in which a family was struck at Bridge in Winnequa. Our officer who handled that call would love nothing more but to do more enforcement in that area. Instead, unfortunately, we fall to the mercy of calls for service. We have to respond to certain calls when they occur. I'd love ideally to have the resource to say, you know what, I want 1 cop that is not tied to the radio. Unless it's an absolute emergency, you have cops screaming for help, you have a very violent situation, I'd love for nothing more to have 1 cop who just does traffic. Can you imagine that? We had a traffic cop. There's enough work here for traffic enforcement for an officer. Our community relations officer does good work, Nate Reynolds.
Nate, he's great.
Yeah, Nate does good work. Nate's going back to patrol. I don't know if Nate told you. Nate's going back to patrol. He's going to do more patrol work. Landon Flora, who's been on the department for 7, 8 years now. Great officer.
You're staying here though?
Nate's staying here, yeah. Landon Flora is going to take that over. And so Landon, will be doing that work. But the community relations officer, you know what Nate's doing right now? He's filling in for patrol. Because, somebody's on leave or, somebody's sick. We don't have the resources or the ability to keep our community relations officer doing community relations work. I know we're not a city of 50,000 plus. I know we're landlocked. The only way we seem to be growing is up. I get that. I get resources are thin. I'm fiscally responsible. Politically, I'm aligned that way too, okay? But public safety is paramount. And so my job is to go to the council and the mayor and relay the information I'm receiving from our constituents and saying, Mayor, they're asking for more traffic. Mayor, by the way, you're asking for more traffic. Council members, here's what I'm hearing from the community, but here's the resources I got. Here's how what you do, you pay me as chief to determine sort of how best to use these resources. I'm telling you, I can only move the pieces around so much because I also have to think about health and wellness of our officers. And I also have to think about retention, and I also have to think about recruitment. So your officers and your dispatchers are doing fabulous work with the resources that are in place. I'm telling you that it's not sustainable. And if Jerry was here, you'd be hearing the same thing from the fire department. We're not asking for Madison resources, but you can expect us to start to ask for some more resources in the years to come. So to be able to provide high quality public safety services to all of you, which I think you expect. I don't normally get the right answer. I normally get people think we have 4 working at a time. We don't. We don't have a day shift supervisor. There's nobody to supervise the officers who are currently working. And with supervision also comes mentorship. There's nobody mentoring my day shift officers right now. And who has the highest call volume? Our first shift officers and our afternoon shift officers who likely need the most support. And so when you hear me begging for more cops, it's when I need to, right? And I'm not every year gonna beg for more cops, that's Madison. Every year I'm not gonna ask for more cops. When I ask for more resources, I'll explain why. I'll explain what they're gonna be utilized for, and I'll explain what will happen if. And it's not an ultimatum, there's just a decision point, right? For example, one of the sacrifices I had to make this year, because I have not asked for more officers in 2022, was I had to scale back the calls for service that we typically have responded to. For example, private property parking violations. You know, we used to go from, officers having to, not having, but me directing officers in my short time here to do traffic enforcement and proactive enforcement, or the night shift having to do patrols, because we've had some burglaries. And then they get pulled away from that assignment because somebody's got an abandoned car in a big box commercial store parking lot that needs to be ticketed, right? That's not a good use of our resources, in my opinion. I'd rather the officer do what they were doing. So I've rescinded that. I've said if you are on private property and you have an abandoned vehicle, state law allows you to contract with a tow company to address it. You don't need police involvement. I mean, honestly, you don't. If there's a disabled issue, we'll deal with it. Like a handicap violation, yes, we'll deal with it. If there's a fire lane or safety issue, we'll deal with it. We're in the business of public safety. The other thing we're changing is private property crashes. A private property crash is an insurance issue. The police officers, with the exception of an OWI, so driving while drunk, reckless driving, a hit and run, or running over a fire hose, cannot write a traffic ticket when it happens on private property. So if two cars get into a fender bender at Ken's Meat Market in the lot there, all we're doing is spending about 60 minutes of our time filling out paperwork in the office for an insurance claim. I don't think that that's a good use of your time, or our officer's time. The alternative is already in place. There's a self-report system that the Department of Transportation has in place in which you can fill out your report online. If by chance it doesn't qualify, meaning that the damage is under $1,000, say it's just a minor fender bender, there's a small paint scrape in your 1980 automobile, which will cost a couple $100 to repair, but you still want to address it. The Monona Police Department has a way in which you can self-report, and you can complete that report. That gives your officers more time to do the proactive enforcement that they need to do, or finish up that report that's one day behind that the chief's been barking at them about to complete, right? It gives them that time. A couple more changes. Theft complaints. Theft complaints that are misdemeanor and lower. Misdemeanor is $2,500 or lower, where there is no suspect information, meaning that you've had something stolen from your front lawn that's under $250, and the neighbors don't have a camera, you don't have a camera, there's no information of who took it whatsoever. We're going to refer you to self-report. It'll be documented, it'll be reviewed by a cop, but we're not going to stop what we're doing to go out to address a case that is likely, not always, but likely not going to result in further follow-up, or the solvability rate is really low. We'll read the report, and you be as elaborate as you want. You'll probably be more elaborate than the cop with taking it, to be frank. But you be as thorough and as detailed as you would like. And if we determine, wow, this is linked to something else, we'll assign it out, and we'll contact you, and we'll do the follow-up. More often than not, the officers who, prior to me instituting this new rule, were breaking from what they were going to a case that's not solvable. That's something was stolen that was $50 from somebody's front yard, that the member of the community didn't do in my opinion, a good enough job of securing the property, right? That ended up in an officer taking not only the time to respond out there, but then having to do the report. Now, when I started, the reports were all paper form. And I know I'm not that old, right? When I started, everything was paper and carbon copy. Those days are gone. All of our forms now are really to not only receive the information, but it's to capture data. Data drives a lot of what we do, and as it should. But this report that I'm referring to, this theft report of $50, may take an officer 30 to 40 minutes to complete because of all of the bullet points and all of the mandatory report fields that they have to fill out. You instead, please take the time to do that so our officers are out and about. If it's a felony, meaning it's higher than $2,500, regardless if you have suspect information or not, A felony is a serious offense. It's a high enough dollar amount. We will respond ourselves to investigate that. If it's under that dollar amount, we're going to read your report and determine if we need to do more follow-up on that. I will tell you that the last thing that I've changed, in addition to theft, is criminal damage to property. The same concept. If you had somebody, damage something that's under $2,500, you have zero suspect information whatsoever, we're going to refer you to self-report. Again, if we determine after reading your report that more follow-up is warranted, we'll contact you and do a further investigation. But we're not going to stop the officer in their tracks so that they respond out to take a report that has low solvability rate. However, if there's a hate enhancer to any of these things, or the probability that this is linked to a hate crime, our officers will respond out to take that complaint and do that investigation. The goal in this, as I said before, is to allow the officers to do a lot of the administrative tasks that are demanded of them in their jobs, that the chief is barking down at them to say, where is this report, I need this done, because they're 5, 10 plus reports behind. But also allows them the proactive time to do the enforcement that we all expect them to do. The proactive patrol, the burglary prevention. Right now we're doing an operation that's countywide that we're hosting, that's where I just left from, and I will return to an operation that is aimed at addressing stolen automobiles and recovering stolen automobiles and holding those responsible who are stealing all of these cars. Your agency, little old Monona PD, is hosting a countywide, and it's our, I was going to say 5, but holding up 4 fingers. It's our either 4th or 5th time hosting a countywide event. That's the leadership that this agency plays in this community and in the Dane County area. You had a question, I'm sorry.
No, I just wanted to follow up with what you said.
Sure.
Our judges need to put the clamps down on these stolen vehicles. And I know myself, because it happened to me by Menards on a Saturday morning last year on the 11th, by someone that held a gun to my side of my vehicle. I wasn't concerned about myself, but he was out on a $2,000 hold that someone anonymously paid. You go back in his track record, he had done something every month on the 11th. You might know who this is. I'll only give the first name because he'll never get out of prison. They let him go, which I don't blame because there's a lot of traffic. Had a black and silver gun on his seat, and he had a stolen vehicle, so he knew they were looking for him. It was great what they got a good deputy sheriff came into play. They found the vehicle dumped behind Menards because there's all kinds of little single roads back in there. The next month, he's the one that killed Anissa Scott. He's part of the group, a little 11-year-old girl. I don't know if anybody remembered that last year. She was with her mother's boyfriend with a bad track record. But for me, it was a lot. I knew I was okay. I'm used to these thugs, I call them thugs. But what broke my heart was he was out, and these judges go like this. And so for a long time, it makes me sick to think this little girl could be alive had they just kept him. If they just kept him in there.
Well, first let me say I'm sorry you're a victim of a pretty horrific crime, so I'm sorry you had to experience that.
It's a good awakening for me because I hadn't realized that, I use the word thugs, maybe it's not a good word, but I do. There were so many of them out there, I didn't really pay attention. I grew up in this area, and then I moved out to the country, and I had to move back to take care of parents. Well, then I realized I'm going down the Beltline, and we got 90 miles an hour going behind you, and you see the little groups. Now it's kind of difficult because there's a little bit more traffic because everybody's going back to work. But I guess what I don't understand, I can ask you this. I tried with Madison, but you know how that goes sometimes. How can you drive a vehicle? I know I can't. I know I can't. With no license plate, a smeared license plate, dark windows, and drive around. If I did that, I would be pulled over and arrested. But these groups of young people, mainly young, under the age of 40, no, and I've talked to a few of them. I'm not that brave, but I was brave, I had to ask. They know the police department, they did put a bad cast out Madison, will not do anything to them. So they're just doing this because they know nothing will ever happen to them. So to them, it's kind of fun and games. But to other people, it is very scary if you go down a belt line and you got a little white car, and you can't get a plate number going 90 miles an hour on you, behind your vehicle, then swarm over and then laugh. It is very scary, it's very,
It is, well,
but why is that I have to have plates,
right,
plates are not cheap.
Yep.
I have to have insurance, that's not cheap. But we have all these cars out there.
right.
And I know when they go through the neighborhoods, there's another game they play too, I'm sure you've heard about this one. They throw an empty cup out the window. You heard that game?
No, we're not chasing empty cups, but.
Well, it's a game that they do play in neighborhoods about throwing cups out a window to see if anybody's gonna come out and pick one up. I know the insides and outs of all this, but when a vehicle comes through like my neighborhood dressed like that, we know that it's not a normal.
Yeah, thank you. There's two things at play here. Number one, my focus will always be on hazardous driving violations. So, yes, can we pull somebody over for registration, improper display, for tinted windows? Yes, I am more drawn to what the driver is doing in the hazardous driving violations. Number two, there was a long period of time there in which officers were prohibited from enforcing registration or equipment violations because we were under state emergency order. And once the state one expired, we were still bound by the county emergency order, which, by the way, is still in effect until the 27th. I think we have to wear masks until.
I think they just changed it to the 15th of January.
Now it's pushed, the new order's in place?
That's
Well, that's what
UW.
I kind of heard today. I
Okay.
know the campus does it for sure.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the campus is gonna do their own thing. But if there's a health order mandated by the county, the DA's office weighs in and determines, does that apply to the state statute under an emergency order or does it not? The DA's office has previously ruled that they will not pursue some of these offenses because they interpreted it as being under the emergency order.
Okay, that's.
So that's part of it, not all of it. The other thing too is of the greater danger aspect. I would love nothing more than be able to catch every single one of these young persons often and hold them responsible. Now, is it worth endangering the lives of all of you who are traveling, going about your business, and then some yahoo running from the cop blows a stop sign and kills a family of 4? No. Number one, I don't think it's ethically right for me to push our officers to do that. Number two, we're gonna get sued to high heaven as a result, and it's happened, right? There's case law that talks about, in the due regard concept and making sure that we weigh the community's safety with that of trying to apprehend the suspect. And so we're sort of rethinking our options and trying to be more creative and imaginative as to how we can catch these culprits and using technology and relying on our federal partners and their technology and resources in which to get it done. To your early point about recidivism or the most frustrating part probably of a police officer's job is that they spend a lot of time investigating a case. They do a great job of catching the suspect. They give the victim the resources that they need. By the time the cop is back at work tomorrow, the bad guy or girl is out of jail. That's not to say that is, sometimes that's okay, and it's case appropriate, but I think that the challenge is twofold. There's likely a lot of political pressure in Dane County for that not to occur. I'll leave it at that. The sheriff, I don't know if you've been following along, has been asking for jail space, and his predecessor has for some time.
Yes.
The jail is at capacity, beyond capacity. Where are we gonna put these people when we arrest them? The sheriff has only so few options. He can't violate the state law in breaking conditions of the jail, so he's gotta offer Huber or offer electronic monitor or offer something to get some of those people out of jail. The commissioners know that, who are granting bail. The DA's office knows that, who's arguing for bail. Part of the issue too is that this is all part of public safety. And you can't just fund the boots on the ground. You have to fund that DA's office who's not had additional staffing since like the 80s or something like that. Ridiculous. Where I can't you know, pick up a phone and get an answer on a case because there's staffing. Yeah, there's nobody there. And I'm speaking to extreme. Of course, if I call, somebody will answer. I'm the chief of police, but the resources aren't where they should be with the DA's office. Now, I think the power is in the vote. All of our judges are elected officials, you know, outside of an appointment due to a vacancy. So if you've not monitored track records or, you know, you've not participated in judicial elections, please consider doing so because that matters. The running joke, and I have friends who do law enforcement in agencies that are outside of Dane County, is I hope the criminal commits a crime in our county, because if they did in Dane County, nothing would happen.
There you go.
Right? We work with State Patrol. We're working with them today. The running joke is, well, if they get caught for a crime, I hope it's in Jefferson County, or I hope it's in Dodge County, or I hope it's in a different county, because they know that they're going to be held to a different level of accountability in those counties, because they have the resources to address it, right? And frankly, I think it's more than just a simple answer of nobody wants it to get done. I think they do. I think they're limited in what they're able to do. And particularly with the kids. There are so few options out there for kids who you know, need to be held accountable for some behavior. But there's got to be a solution. There absolutely has to be a solution. Yeah, I'm all about boot camp and, you know, all about, you know, young kids. Oftentimes, the military was an option that has helped change
Boys Ranch.
lives. I'm not saying that that's the solution, but, you know, just open up options for folks that, you know, and a lot of these creative things are already happening, but I think putting the spotlight more so is important. And so you have the power of, you know, making change through bringing to attention the record of some of our elected officials. I'm not saying to do it, I'm just saying that the power lies with all of
Oh,
you.
yes, we know that.
Okay, and that's to be said about your, you know, great county commissioners out here as well, who oversee obviously the county budget. So, and then I had a question over here, then I think, no? Oh, okay, and I've been talking to my limit.
I was wondering, I've been told that if you call 911 from a cell phone, that it goes through Dane County or City of Madison, it comes back here. If you call 911 from a landline, it goes right here.
Okay,
Is that true?
no. If you call 911 from anywhere, that goes downtown. From your landline to your cell phone, that goes to the Dane County Communications Center, the 911 center located in the city-county building. They handle all of the 911 calls here. That didn't used to be the case years back, I'm told, but that has been the case in the recent years. So if you want to reach a Monona officer, and it may not necessarily rise the level of 911, but you need somebody to get there reasonably quick, call our non-emergency. That'll get to our Monona dispatcher, the non-emergency number. That'll get to our Monona dispatcher, who will dispatch it to our Monona officers. If our Monona officers aren't available and it rises to the level of, yeah, somebody needs to address this, we'll ask for help. We'll ask for Madison to go out. We'll ask for McFarland's a good participating law enforcement neighbor of ours. They'll go out and respond. If you call 911, it's going to go downtown. What happens is that they enter it in the computer, and it takes them time to enter it into the computer. Then it gets transported to our dispatch center. Our dispatch center has to acknowledge it, and then they have to dispatch it out. And oftentimes, when you're on the phone with 911, they want you to stay on the line, especially if it's something happening live. You're talking to the downtown county dispatcher. We are going to get the electronic version of whatever you're transmitting to them. So, yeah.
So they wouldn't transfer, they wouldn't transfer with your voice to you guys?
So they take all the information.
But they don't transfer the voice part, they just transfer.
Correct. So while they're getting your information, they're typing it live, and that's being updated live to our dispatcher. Say, for example, you're saying, okay, now he's in a red coat getting into a black car. Red coat, black car, send. Our dispatchers get that. instantaneously when they're typing and hit send, we're gonna get that. But no, we're not listening in, for example. They can transfer calls. So they can transfer that, you know, once the situation's been handled, they can transfer that over to us and we can, you know, communicate with the complainant, but they're gonna handle the exigent part of that call, that 911 part. They're also trained in CPR and can give life-saving information. Our dispatchers need to be up to date on that. They're out of date. So we're working on that this year and next year. Yes, and I'm sorry, did you have a question back there? I'm sorry, I thought I saw a hand back there. No? Okay, yes.
Could you just respond briefly to this pandemic we have of gun violence? I mean, I've lived in Madison since 1943. Well, not in Madison, but in Dane County. And it was rare that you ever, and now in the last 5 years, it's just gotten out of control.
It has. They're resorting to gun violence over fists, right? It used to be you handled something like this, which is still the answer, but this used to be the way you resolve something, and now they're resorting to guns. Here's my request for all of you while we work to address the gun violence. Do you know where they're getting most of these guns from? Your unlocked property. They're taking them out of cars. Heaven forbid, and I hope this doesn't happen, but we have had cases in Monona where this has, where you're out of home, they've burglarized your residence, and the guns are left unsecured in a residence when you're not home. They're taking and stealing firearms and using it in the actions of their crimes. And I'd love to say we can do our part while the cops try to address the violent behavior. I would love for all of us to do our part as community members to lock our guns up. Those of us who own guns, lock them up, put them in safes, even in your cars. They make safes for cars in which folks who decide to carry even, you know, when they're out and about. We've had a lot of guns stolen from vehicles as well. But yes, it's out of control. Yeah.
That'd be mostly people that have got concealed carry permits.
Or not. You don't need one to openly carry in the state of Wisconsin. So you can.
It's not illegal.
It's not illegal. You can, sir. You can. Outside of a school zone, you can walk down the street here openly carrying a AR assault rifle, and there's nothing I can do with it. It's perfectly legal for you to do.
And if I get pulled over by the police and I got a 9mm under my seat,
then you need a concealed carry permit.
Then I do.
Yes.
Well, I don't have one. I'm not going to buy a 9mm.
I was wondering if you were asking for a friend or. But good question. You know, and I've seen in a short time you said the 40s. You know, I'll shorten that. Since I started in Madison in the early 2000s, it's drastically increased the gun violence. And we talked about Anissa Scott and other victims here who've been victims of gun violence in which they weren't the target.
So the difference is if it's concealed, it's in the car, they can walk on the street?
Yeah, you can walk.
Yeah, so you can open, if somebody can see it,
They can see
it's legal.
Yeah.
If somebody can't see it, it's illegal, except you need a permit for that, a concealed carry permit.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's more to it, but that's just a quick summary.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for coming. Yes, thank you for being patient.
There's a lot of talk about de-escalating
Yes.
situations, and is Monona interested in working on de-escalating situations? My son had some mental problems at one time, depressed and so forth, and he took too much Excedrin. He knew it was toxic. He came up, he told me, I think I took too much. And I said, I'm not gonna drive you down to the hospital, I'll call the EMS. And of course, police came at the same time.
Right.
And they had asked me, is he violent or anything? I said, no, I just don't wanna drive him because I could get ticketed for going too fast. And so anyway, to make a long story short, I went in the house and to get his cap. He wanted his cap before he got in the ambulance. And they had started to handcuff him, which would have made him much more, and they were gonna put him in the police car. And I came out in time, and this this was the youngest of the two officers, and I said, he's not violent. And I said, this will make him defensive, and when you put him in that police car, he's gonna be angry rather than, and the other policeman said, I understand you, and said, if anything, we could accompany him if he appears to be violent in the ambulance. And so I really, I went over to the police department, and it took me a while, because I was really pretty mad about it.
Yeah, thanks for calming down first. But
Yeah, I didn't go over angry, but I said, I think the officers need to have training in, because many mental patients are afraid of the police. When I
Yeah.
call the police, they're gonna handcuff, and they'll take me someplace.
Yeah.
So that is something I
Well, it's near and dear to your heart. Yeah, you experienced it. First of all, I hope that he and you have recovered from that incident. You know, we are two things. I don't offer up excuses, but bear with me, right? We're asked to do too much sometimes as cops. We are, you know, learned and trained to help save lives physically from trauma. We go into gunfights. We address school issues. We address domestic situations. We troubleshoot civil issues. We handle car crashes. We deal with retail thefts. We have fraud complaints from people from India scamming folks here. And we have what I think deserves the attention of an individual group is folks who struggle with mental illness. That folks go to get master's degrees to specialize in that sort of thing, right? We have officers that, although are compassionate about it, frankly, there's not enough resources for me to train them to the level in which is deserved. There just aren't. And then we rely on that resource too much. Instead, I would rather have a 24/7 response agency that can respond to those situations that you just described, can assess to see if police are needed, and then if we're needed because of the dangerousness factor, we can respond and work in concert with that person.
Well, I was surprised they came. I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't know that they accompanied every call,
We-
you know.
We will likely, and here's why. Not every situation is your son, nor do we know how your son is going to react or respond. You do, because you know him, right? But we've encountered situations in which the person has been perfectly fine, lack of a better term, and then an officer's gotten killed at the end of that contact,
Yeah,
right?
I know.
And it's, what we deal with is so unpredictable on a day-to-day basis. I pat down grandmas and grandpas before they get into my car. Do you know why? Because grandma and grandpas have killed cops before, right? And so we get this training and we get this repetition of be safe, be safe, be safe, be safe. But you're right, we do need more de-escalation training. We've had some, and our officers, frankly, in my experience, because I've been out in the streets, I don't know if you've heard, but I've been out riding with them and helping, backing them up and taking calls. They're very, very patient for the most part in interacting with folks and assessing. However, I can tell you that there's only so many tools on our belt. And what we rely on often is what's the best possible resolution, and that also sometimes is the quickest resolution to where we need to go. And so that often means putting people we don't know that are likely unpredictable due to a manic state into handcuffs temporarily. And sometimes that means we transport them. I went to Winnebago Mental Hospital as chief of police because I wanted to experience that. Sean Fogeltantz, one of our most veteran officers, started that call early on in his day shift. I got home from the mental health hospital at 2 a.m. That's how long it takes to handle some of these calls. And should it be the police, this young man, he was a young man, juvenile. We had to convey him in a backseat of a squad car after he spent hours in a hospital. Mind you, this person's in crisis. Hours in a hospital. We had to convey him in a squad car from Monona, well, technically Madison, it was Madison Hospital, to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, in a backseat of a squad car handcuffed because of a safety issue, right? He can do harm to himself if not restrained, or can harm the vehicle or us if not restrained. Do I think that that is the solution? No. I would love for Monona to be opened back up. It's not. It's not an option for us. I would love for that to be opened back up, or for another responsible agency that's not law enforcement to be responsible for mental health assessments and conveyances.
I think what happens, though, to the person who, it's related to other mentally challenged. My brother was a schizophrenic, and the worst thing for him to think about was that he would do something that the police were calling for. That don't call the police, you know, and that should, I want that to go away.
Yeah.
I, as an older person, I always thought of policemen as the village helper. You
Yeah.
know, I'm still in that mood.
Yeah.
But to somebody mentally ill, they're very frightening of them. One thing you can do, if I can just, I'm a legal guardian, I have a client that has mental illness. Madison, excuse me about Madison, was not helpful in a situation. What I did is I called the Madison Police Department, went up there, put her name, which you could do in Monona if your son lives in Monona, let them know that he has these issues.
Yeah.
Sometimes officers come and they don't
It's-
know that they have these issues.
Yeah, it's developing a response plan.
It gives you a little heads up.
Folks who have dementia in our community, or they're staying with a loved one, folks who have, you know, significant mental
It gives
illnesses.
I
them up.
didn't know that, did you know that?
Yeah, so you can just go to the police department, explain your situation, and give sort of a, what is helpful tips if an officer or fire department have to
Boy,
respond.
that should, I don't know if I'm just out of the loop, but did any of you know that?
Yes. I
So,
have
and
done
if
it
you
for a
work
long
with,
time.
I didn't know that.
Journey Mental Health, so our contracted Dane County mental health organization, they help guide you through that too. So you can, when we're done here, I can give you the number to Journey Mental Health.
It's no longer
Oh,
an issue
okay,
with
okay.
me at all, and
Okay.
my son lives elsewhere now.
Okay.
Um,
Thank you for
it was-
sharing.
It was something that I really, and I did view the video of the officers who were on Arrowhead.
Yeah.
And I don't, were you here then?
No.
But anyway, I viewed it, I really thought the officers did a fantastic job there. And most of the time, but I sure like that you want us to know the policemen. I mean, I wave at policemen, go by on Winnequa Road, but I don't get any response. You know?
Yeah, you know, I've heard that a couple times. Thanks for saying that. I've asked our officers to think about it. The community doesn't know what the officer is doing at the time. And I guarantee
Yeah,
you,
right.
if the officer, I can't guarantee you that, because I don't know what the officer in that case was doing. I hope they weren't being rude. But they're listening to the radio, they're thinking about what they're gonna do next when they arrive on scene, they're looking at the computer. There have been times people have complained that I haven't waved at them too, because I've got
Well,
1,000 things going in my head.
Maybe, yeah, see, but I'm old, and the officers
Back in the days.
was, the one officer that was in our community, you know, was our friend. And
Yeah.
I think your idea though of getting us to know you.
It's connected
to
more,
know-
yes.
Connecting in some way
Yes.
before you call them, and they say, oh, that crazy lady on Winnequa Road called me.
And waved at me.
And that one that waved
Yeah.
at me, right?
Yeah, no, I wave all day long, and I'm hoping
Well,
but I'm hoping to model that behavior, and, you know, they have been coming out to community engagements with
That's
me.
good.
But mandating it, you sometimes have to force folks a little bit, and then they say, oh, this isn't bad, actually, I love this, you know? And by the way, I'm giving them time away from this radio, because sometimes they're so drawn to this, like, what's the next call, I gotta go,
Yeah.
I'm disconnecting this from them so that they can spend more time. My radio's off right now. They'll call me if something bad happens, but I'm focusing on you all. And I want the officers and our dispatchers to have that same experience, because not a lot have had the repetitions of going through that. Some have, but not a lot have. Great points here. Couple more questions and then, yes, back behind you and then, yes.
Do you recommend ever thinking about getting more watch groups available, and maybe to help protect the communities in which they live, which that would also maybe help you as well to report as a group things that are happening?
Nate, who was mentioned earlier, is part of the, organizing the Good Neighbor Project. And so that's a version of a neighborhood watch. It's folks that, I hate to compare it to Nextdoor, online because it's something else, but it incorporates communicating with your neighbor, knowing your neighbor. If something looks out of place, you should have a number for your neighbor, or you can call the police if something looks out of place, or neighbor left their garage door open and that's unusual. By the way, please start closing your garage doors, please.
Locking cars.
There's already systems in place. I think what you would think about a traditional sort of neighborhood watch, it has evolved and might not be the best solution for Monona. But the Good Neighbor Project is something that we're participating in. And you know what, I think I have a little bit of advantage in that I'm coming from Madison. I have a lot of close connections with our colleagues at Madison PD. So I'm classmates with the East Police District Captain, and I know very well Mike Hansen of the South District and all the command staff over there. I don't want us to be siloed, because the criminals aren't siloed. The criminals are committing crimes right across the street from Monona Drive, and are coming right over here. And the fact that we're not communicating as often as we should is concerning to me. And so I'm working on bridging the gap between the Lake Edge community across the street and Monona, and the same with the South Side crew. I used to call it Simpson Street, but it's something else now. Lake Point, thank you. Same with that community as well when we're talking about issues along Bridge Road or even Winnequa there. And so they also have a very strong, active Good Neighbor Project organization that meets quite often. And so I think, it is on our website, but if you want more information after, I can certainly share that with you.
Can I ask one more quick
Yes.
question? Could you put something out on Nextdoor Monona telling people how to protect themselves in their own home site, making sure they put the garage lights on, they put lights on inside their home? Just a thing that would be giving everybody the same piece of information to try to help.
Yes. The reason I'm hesitating, because I know that has been going on out there. We've shared a lot of Lock It or Lose It campaigns, and what we found is that if you need to do reminders from time to time. So we have put that out there, but you're giving me another reminder that maybe it's time. We did so, I think, a month and a half ago, when we had a series of burglaries, likely from one crew that happened over a weekend. It might be time to do another reminder. And I've done PSAs and videos out as well, and there was a point in which we had recent burglaries and we did a PSA, and I just did a quick social experiment to see how many people actually listen to their new chief of police. As I'm driving around, I'm seeing, I think I counted up to 18 garage doors wide open, nobody around as I'm driving around. And yes, you can be in your backyard, but
Still locked.
yeah, I can walk in your door and take your garage remote and come back later, right? When you're sleeping, or when I think you're out of town. I want you to feel safe, but I want you to be smart. That we're no longer that sleepy little town, formerly Blooming Grove, that I heard we once were. Madison is no longer the little town that Madison once was. We have to adapt, and we have to be smart about securing our property. And so yes, we will look to put another update, and I'll talk to Nate about that. Nate will, if he was here right now, Nate would say, "I'd love to do it, Chief, but you got me in patrol." Right? Going to that whole point I was saying before, we don't necessarily have the community relations officer out there every day that I'd like to have. But you're right, point well taken, thank you. Yes, sir, and then I gotta wrap up. Thank you.
I just wanted to check on something.
Yeah.
What is the response, how many times do you go to Walmart on an average basis a day?
It varies, sometimes multiple times a day, multiple 3, 4, 5 times a day. Sometimes once. There may be a day that we don't, but there isn't 3 or 4 days that go by that we certainly don't respond. We're always there.
Would there be any reason to put, we got SROs in the schools? Would there be a reason, or would Walmart be helpful with that, with having an SRO or something like that in their store?
I've begun exploring sort of contracted work. I come from an agency at Madison PD where you can hire a cop, if you're having an event, or as long as you're not a licensed establishment, which by the way Walmart is, because it creates a conflict if you're the cop and the doorman, but you're also going to be the one citing the entity for a violation. So it creates a legal conflict, but there's nothing to be said that we can't monitor, for example, the property. The struggle is who wants to do that job.
Well, you're in a quandary with almost all this stuff, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean,
With chases, with mental health, you're always in a quandary. Can you do this and can you not, or whatever, and when do you have to stop a chase? I see people run red lights 2 times or 3 times in one street, and there's nobody around, but what
Right.
can you do? You gotta have somebody.
Instead, to your point about, thank you, you're right, we need the resources, but to your point about Walmart, instead, we're working with them about adjusting their business model, and that's a multi-billion-dollar corporation that answers to wherever they base out of, somewhere in the South. And they have bosses too, and so they, as much as I want them to lock some things up, they're under sort of corporate direction on things that, you know, for display purposes, they can't do certain things, and but we have changed their tactics, or asked them to change their tactics. They used to call us when they think somebody's going to steal something, and we used to go out there. They do that from time to time, but that's typically because the person was known to them that had previously stolen from the store. But for the most part, they're working on adjusting that. And what I'd like them to do instead is intercede and say, hey, Walmart loss prevention, not sure, and I don't mean to pick on Walmart necessarily, they're just one, obviously our big box store. Walmart loss prevention, we are monitoring your behavior is somewhat suspicious. Hopefully you're going to pay for whatever you just put in your pocket. You know, things like that. I hope for them to be more preventive and proactive. We've seen some change from, my predecessor had to deal with this issue, Wally did, Pupil Stringa did, and we've seen some progress, but we're still going out there. And I think that as Monona looks to put different commercial sites or different residential sites, that's a discussion that also needs to be had. How will this impact public safety? You know, is the next big box store that we're looking to put in going to draw resources from an already, you know, thinly staffed police department? It's something that all of you folks have to weigh in on when those discussions come in. I don't know of one cop who would jump up and down and say, I want to be staffed at Walmart. That's not why they signed up to do this job. But I also think Walmart has a responsibility to, again, just because there are major big box store in town, not want to pick on Walmart per se, but that they have a responsibility to protect their own property and change their business model so that it deters people from stealing from them as well.
Does Wisconsin's concealed carry influence like the theft prevention people in stores from wanting to approach people, not knowing, you know, who is carrying and who's not?
No, I think it's some of you who are lawyers in the room. I think it's they're getting legal sort of risk management advice or direction, not advice, direction.
To make sure they're not profiling.
Well, not necessarily profiling, but you know, if I get injured as a result of taking action, you know, there's a work comp issue, but I can potentially seek additional damages from not only the person who hurt me, but also the corporation if they didn't set certain measures in place or policies in place. And so I think the corporation is trying to protect also their clients or their employees as well. So it's a business practice. But I don't think that the CCW law in particular is deterring folks from taking action. But that's something that I'm sure is considered when they write these policies, that you never know who you're going to encounter. And we've seen people do pretty horrific things for, you know, the smallest thing that was stolen. You know, they'll drive 80 through the parking lot trying to get away, or they'll, you know, shove somebody on their way out who's an elderly person, or just because they're trying to get away. And so you got to think, what's the greater danger here? This product that we should have done a better job of securing. I mean, folks are walking out with TVs. Like, I can't even buy a razor without asking somebody to unlock the box.
Right.
But yet I can walk out with a TV. So it's a change in business practice. I think is probably where the discussion should be had. so that we're not responding out to Walmart as much as we do. But we're, you know, it's just not, it's not just Walmart, it's Kohl's, it's, you know, it's all these other, yeah, I mean,
Right, yeah.
we have commercial entities in town that we're responsible for providing public safety, and that sometimes draws us away from all the residential areas and other folks that we want to try to provide service to as well.